The joy that you find here you borrow. You cannot keep it long, it seems. But gigolo and gigolette still sing a song and dance along the boulevard of broken dreams.
Everyone who lived through the Great Depression has a story to tell. Stay with us as ordinary people recall extraordinary times in Pennsylvania.
My sweetheart's the mule in the mine. I drive her without any line.
The Depression exacerbated a grinding poverty that existed in coal towns of Pennsylvania before the 1930s. Wages rose slightly in the early 20s, only to fall as production often exceeded demand. Work was sporadic. Then the Depression hit, and production slowed even more. Osceola Mills was no exception.
The wages started going down, and you'd go to work in the mines. Of course, I wasn't working at that time yet, but I remember my dad coming home and says, well, we got another cut today in wages. To where he was working on the piecework by the ton, loading coal by the ton, where towards the end of the Depression, or it was real bad, they were working for 39, 40 cents a ton, from about 75, 80, or 90 cents whenever Depression hit.
We always had enough to eat. We had our own cow, pigs, chickens, but didn't have the clothes, and especially shoes. I'll never forget that. Had to take the shoes off and walk in your bare feet because you wanted to save on. My father couldn't afford it.
Despite the hardships, mothers and fathers found ways to make their children happy, especially at Christmas.
I still remember a little doll that I got. I just can't forget it. It was a little doll. It was wonderful. It was a good feeling. And they really, my parents were really considerate, loving for at Christmas or at any time.
It took us a whole week preparing for Christmas Eve. That to us was the biggest meal of the year. I don't know, of course, Easter too, but Christmas Eve was, you passed the wafer, and you had to drink whatever it was, just depend what you could afford, what you had at that time, but it was always some kind of a drink. And then you had 7, 9, 11, or 13 dishes.
And the checks didn't come, and I didn't have anything for the children. Christmas Eve was coming, and so I didn't know what to do, and there was nowhere where I could go, so I went downtown. There was a store, Mr. Law's.
Stores often extended credit to families without work during the Depression. In Osceola Mills, there was no one coal company and no one store where Mrs. Sikowski shopped. But in Windber, 120 miles away, Eureka Stores was part of a web of support provided to employees by the sole employer in town, Berwyn White Coal Company.
Eureka Stories accumulated possibly $900,000. And the best part of it is when they started back to work, that money was, that account was, say, owed $900. That was put aside and say we took off $10 of pay. I would say of the $900,000, we lost maybe 1 or 2%.
The extension of credit was not entirely altruistic. It kept a skilled workforce in Berwyn and made miners ineligible for relief or for employment on public works.
There was no public works at all that I know of in this locality, and they may have been around other places, but evidently they didn't need it here because the store kept them going. And I think the people were very appreciative of the fact, even today, even the younger people realize that how their parents were kept by the store. The Berwyn people had a good reputation. They came out here with a good reputation. Better than the average company store. Company store is a bad nomenclature.
Back in Osceola Mills, where there was no company control, public works did appear.
Osceola had the streets paved. Now a lot of that work was physical, although it could have been done by mechanical means, but it wasn't because they wanted to put people to work. and instead of running rock through a rock crusher, they would have the men with sledgers, and they would sledge the coal, and then they'd spread it and roll it.
I used to hear a lot of objections about the bosses. I went in a coal mine. I got along with them. What they told you to do, you did it, and you got along. If you objected, you should tell you, take your tools and go.
Take your tools and go was a coal company's response to many objections that miners had. The company paid miners only for the coal they brought to the surface, not for time spent preparing to mine or load coal, or for cleaning up, commonly called dead work. Operators frequently used out-of-balance scales to undercredit a miner's load of coal.
Instead of getting the true weight on the car, you'd load a car up. I'd see them coming out, they'd be loaded up like wagon loads of hay, and whenever they went over the scale, you got 1,700 pounds on it, where it should weigh a ton. After they put a unionized, back in 1933, they unionized, put check weighmans on. That same car of coal weighed 1.5 tons, up to size to almost 2 tons.
Union got organized here in 1932, and the coal company didn't appreciate the union here. But when the Wagner Act came out, why, they had to accept it, and the unions got organized. Up to that time, there was no union.
When the organized union came in 33, why then right away the things got better, but of course it didn't come easy. You had to strike for it. In the Banner Coal Company, the miners went out on strike before that law passed, and that's when they brought in the coal and iron police.
The strikers were calling this the scabs, the workers, the scabs, and my mother was there, and she was hauling scab on them. And the trooper on the horse, he ran her against her, and she fell up and against an embankment, and the horse's hoofs hit her in the chest. And she was in terrible pain for many, many days after that.
Well, they were not the state troopers. They were the coal and iron police. And they could do anything. Now, the state troopers would never do things like they did. Of course, I never went up to watch them because they could do anything. We had no power then. You wasn't allowed to be only 2 people together. If there was 3, they'd push you apart. Mm-hmm. So that was an awful feeling to hear that hoofs in the morning. Think, there those men are going to work, and you don't know if they're coming home or not. You know, you never know what was going to happen.
On paydays, that's what really hurt, whenever the scabs had a payday. And they had a good old time. There was frying bacon and everything. And they were next door to me, and we couldn't afford that. So we ate what we had, like I had chickens. Well, sometimes I kill fryers and stuff like that. And it wasn't easy. And those scabs, they were happy, making you mad, even, you know, it just was terrible during the strike.
In 1933, the National Recovery Act gave mine workers the right to organize. Later, the government strengthened these rights with the National Labor Relations Act, the Wagner Act, in 1935. Many miners saw President Roosevelt as responsible for this legislation, and that perception was one reason Pennsylvania changed from a Republican to a 2-party state in the late 30s and early 40s.
I looked in the registration books of my precinct. There were only 2 registered Democrats. The other 722 were Republicans.
It's Democratic today about 4-1. And that goes back to from Roosevelt on.
A copy of the program you've just seen can be purchased through Penn State Media Sales at mediasales.psu.edu or by calling 800-770-2111.